Never accept a cross from a stranger on the highway. That's the lesson Jack learned the hard way, when a single act of kindness on a desolate Alabama road turned his truck into a living nightmare. What started as a gift became a curse, and what he thought was a man turned out to be something far darker. This is the story of how Jack's sanctuary was invaded, his life shattered, and his soul nearly stolen. And it all began with one simple mistake. Jack Morrison had been driving trucks for 23 years. He'd seen it all, blizzards that turned highways into death traps, fog so thick it swallowed the world whole, stretches of road so lonely they felt like the very edge of existence. But nothing had ever prepared him for what awaited him on that desolate Alabama highway. It was 2:47 a.m. when he first spotted the figure. The road stretched out before him, a black ribbon of asphalt disappearing into an abyss of darkness on both sides. No streetlights, no gas stations, just the oppressive weight of the night pressing in around him. Jack's eyelids felt heavy, his body screaming for rest, but he had a deadline. Chicago by morning. No excuses. His boss had made that crystal clear. One more late delivery, and Jack would find himself out of a job. After 2 decades of loyalty, he'd be tossed aside like yesterday's news. So he pushed through the exhaustion, hands gripping the wheel, coffee long gone cold in the cup holder. That's when his headlights caught him. A man, standing on the shoulder of the road, thumb out, face half hidden in shadow. Jack's foot instinctively moved toward the brake, then hesitated. Every trucker knew the rule. Never pick up hitchhikers. Too many stories, too many drivers who'd made that mistake and paid for it. But something about this guy, something about the way he stood there, perfectly still, not even turning to look at the approaching truck, made Jack's heart race. The man looked wrong. His clothes were tattered, hanging off his frame like they'd been soaked and dried 100 times. His hair was wild, matted, and even from a distance, Jack could see the hollowness in his face, the sagging skin that seemed too loose for his bones. Jack should have kept driving. Every instinct told him to floor it, leave this guy in the rearview mirror, forget he ever existed. But then the man turned. Their eyes met. Jack saw something in that gaze, something desperate, pleading. The man wasn't threatening. He was broken, lost. Like he'd been standing on that road for years, waiting for someone, anyone to stop. Jack's heart twisted. He thought of his own father, who died alone on a roadside after his car broke down, waiting hours for help that never came. He couldn't just leave this guy here. Against every ounce of better judgment, Jack pulled over. The air brakes hissed as the truck came to a stop. Jack rolled down the window, and immediately, the temperature dropped. Not just the cool night, air cold. The kind of cold that sinks into your bones and doesn't let go. The hitchhiker approached slowly, his movements stiff, unnatural. Up close, he looked even worse. His eyes were sunken, ringed with dark circles that looked almost bruised. His lips were cracked and pale. And his smile, God, his smile was all wrong. Too wide, too knowing, like he was in on a joke Jack hadn't heard yet. "Need a ride?" Jack asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though the tremor betrayed him. The man nodded, still smiling. "You have no idea how long I've been waiting." His voice was rough, like he hadn't spoken in years. It scraped against Jack's ears, set his teeth on edge. "Where you headed?" Jack asked, forcing out the words. The man tilted his head, studying Jack with an intensity that made him want to slam the door and drive away. "Wherever you're going." Red flags exploded in Jack's mind. This was a mistake, a huge mistake. But the man was already climbing into the passenger seat, moving with that same jerky, unnatural gait. The cab filled with the smell of damp earth and something else, something rotten, like decay. Jack's pulse quickened. He put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the highway, every nerve in his body screaming at him to get this guy out. But what was he supposed to do? Kick him out in the middle of nowhere? They drove in silence for what felt like an eternity. The only sound was the rumble of the engine and the occasional creak of the cab. Jack kept glancing at the hitchhiker, waiting for him to say something, do something. But the man just sat there, perfectly still, staring straight ahead, hands folded in his lap. Then, without warning, the hitchhiker spoke. "You ever feel like you're being watched?" Jack's blood went cold. "What?" The man turned to face him, and his eyes, Jesus, his eyes were wrong. Too dark, too empty. "On these roads, late at night, you ever feel like something's out there? Following you?" Jack's throat went dry. "No, can't say I have." The hitchhiker's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You will." Silence crashed back down, heavier than before. Jack's mind raced. He needed to get rid of this guy, now. But the next town was still 20 miles out, and every second felt like a countdown to something terrible. Then the hitchhiker reached into his coat. Jack's hand shot toward the door handle, ready to bail if he had to. But the man didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a cross. It was old, ancient, even. The wood was dark, almost black, and stained with something that looked too much like dried blood. It was small enough to fit in a palm, but it radiated a presence that filled the entire cab. The air grew colder, heavier. The hitchhiker held it out toward Jack. "Take it." Jack stared at the cross, every fiber of his being screaming, "No, I don't need." "Take it," the man repeated, his voice suddenly sharp, commanding. "You're going to need protection on this road. Things out here, they don't belong. They hunt, they wait, and if you're not careful, they take." Jack's hands trembled. He didn't want to touch that thing. But the hitchhiker's gaze bore into him, unblinking, relentless. "Please," the man whispered, and for the first time, Jack heard genuine fear in his voice. "Take it, before it's too late." Jack's hand moved on its own, reaching out. The moment his fingers brushed the cross, a surge of ice shot through his veins. The wood was freezing, impossibly cold, like it had been buried in snow for centuries. But he couldn't let go. His hand closed around it, and the hitchhiker's smile returned wider, darker, triumphant. "Good," the man breathed, his voice a low, sinister whisper. "Now you're marked." Jack's heart slammed against his ribs. What the hell does that mean? But the hitchhiker didn't answer. He just pointed ahead. "There, drop me off there." Jack looked up. They were approaching a dark intersection, barely visible in the headlights. No signs, no lights, just a crossroads in the middle of nowhere. Jack pulled over, his hands shaking so badly he could barely control the wheel. The hitchhiker climbed out, moving with that same unsettling stiffness. He stood by the door, staring at Jack through the window. "Thank you for the ride," he said, his voice echoing strangely. "And remember, keep the cross close. You're going to need it." With that, he turned and walked into the darkness. Jack watched him go, waiting for the figure to disappear into the trees. But within seconds, the man was just gone, vanished, like he had been swallowed by the night itself. Jack's breath came in short, panicked gasps. He looked down at the cross in his hand, still ice cold, still radiating that wrongness. What the hell had he just done? He tossed the cross onto the dashboard and slammed the truck into gear, tires screeching as he tore back onto the highway. He needed to get away from this place, away from that man, away from whatever the hell had just happened. But as he drove, a strange sensation crept over him. The air in the cab felt different, heavier, like he wasn't alone anymore. Jack glanced in the rearview mirror. The crossroads were gone, swallowed by darkness. But for just a split second, he could have sworn he saw the hitchhiker standing in the middle of the road, arms outstretched, a macabre grin stretching across his face, a smile that seemed to whisper secrets of the damned. Then he was gone. Jack's heart raced as panic twisted in his gut. He had to get the hell out of there. But the road stretched endlessly ahead, and the shadows seemed to thicken around him, closing in like a predator stalking its prey. As he drove into the night, the weight of the cross felt heavier than ever. It pulsed like a heartbeat on the dashboard, a dark omen of what was yet to come. Jack told himself it was just his imagination, but the cross sitting on his dashboard, it was ice cold. And it was only the beginning of what that thing would bring into his life. Jack didn't stop driving until the sun broke over the horizon. By the time he reached the outskirts of Chicago, his hands were still trembling, his shirt soaked through with sweat despite the cab's heater being off. The cross sat on the dashboard where he'd thrown it, but no matter how hard he tried to ignore it, his eyes kept drifting back to that cursed piece of wood. It looked different in the daylight, less menacing, almost ordinary. Just an old wooden cross, weathered and stained. Jack tried to convince himself that last night had been nothing more than exhaustion playing tricks on his mind. The hitchhiker, the vanishing act, that feeling of being watched, it was all just sleep deprivation. Had to be. He pulled into the loading dock at 6:23 a.m., 3 minutes before his deadline. His boss, Marcus, was already waiting, clipboard in hand, face twisted in its usual scowl, cutting it close. "Morrison," Marcus barked as Jack climbed out of the cab. "Made it, didn't I?" Jack shot back, his voice hoarse from hours of silence. Marcus grunted, scribbling something on his clipboard. "Barely. You look like hell." When's the last time you slept? Jack didn't answer. He couldn't, because the truth was, he was terrified to sleep, terrified of what he might see when he closed his eyes. Take the day off, Marcus said, surprising him. You're no good to me if you wrap that truck around a tree. Be back tomorrow, first thing. Jack nodded, too exhausted to argue. He grabbed his duffel bag from the cab, deliberately leaving the cross on the dashboard. He'd deal with it later. Or better yet, he'd throw the damn thing away and forget any of this ever happened. But as he walked away, something made him stop. A pull, like an invisible thread wrapped around his chest, tugging him back toward the truck. His feet moved on their own, carrying him back to the cab. His hand reached in, fingers closing around the cross. The moment he touched it, that same ice-cold sensation shot through him. But this time it was accompanied by something else, a whisper, so faint he almost missed it. Mine. Jack yanked his hand back, the cross clutched in his fist. His heart hammered against his ribs. He looked around, but the loading dock was empty, except for a few workers unloading cargo in the distance. No one had spoken, no one was there, but he'd heard it, clear as day. Jack's apartment was a small, dingy studio on the south side of Chicago. It wasn't much, but it was his, a place where he could shut out the world and pretend, for a few hours at least, that he wasn't slowly drowning in debt and loneliness. He tossed the cross onto his kitchen counter and headed straight for the shower, desperate to wash away the grime and the memories of last night. The hot water felt like salvation, and for a few blissful minutes, he let himself believe everything would be okay. But when he stepped out of the bathroom, towel wrapped around his waist, he froze. The cross wasn't on the counter anymore. It was sitting on his bed. Jack's blood turned to ice. He'd left it in the kitchen. He was sure of it. There was no way it could have moved on its own. No way. Unless... He approached the bed slowly, every instinct screaming at him to run. But where would he go? This was his apartment, his sanctuary, and some goddamn piece of wood wasn't going to chase him out of his own home. He picked up the cross, and this time, the cold didn't just shoot through his hand. It spread through his entire body, wrapping around his lungs, squeezing until he couldn't breathe. The room spun, the walls seemed to close in, and then he heard it again. You took me home, now I'm yours. Jack dropped the cross like it had burned him. It clattered to the floor, and the moment it left his hand, the pressure on his chest released. He gasped for air, stumbling backward until his back hit the wall. What the hell was happening? He stared at the cross lying on the floor, half expecting it to move, to crawl toward him like some twisted spider. But it just sat there, inert, harmless. Jack's mind raced. He needed to get rid of it. Throw it in the trash, burn it, toss it in the river, anything to get it out of his life. But even as the thought crossed his mind, that invisible thread tightened around his chest again. And he knew that getting rid of the cross wouldn't be that simple. He spent the rest of the day trying to ignore it. He made coffee, watched TV, even tried to nap, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw the hitchhiker's face. That too wide smile, those empty hollow eyes. Now you're marked. What did that even mean? Marked for what? By evening, Jack's nerves were frayed to the breaking point. He paced his apartment, unable to sit still, unable to think about anything except that damn cross. It was still on the floor where he'd dropped it, but he could feel it. A constant, oppressive presence that seemed to fill every corner of the room. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed the cross, shoved it into a plastic bag, and marched out of his apartment. There was a dumpster behind the building. He'd throw it in there, and that would be the end of it. The night air was cool, almost refreshing after the suffocating atmosphere of his apartment. Jack walked to the dumpster, lifted the lid, and hurled the bag inside. It landed with a satisfying thud, disappearing into the pile of garbage. Good riddance, Jack muttered, turning to head back inside. But he only made it 3 steps before he heard it. A scratching sound. Coming from the dumpster, Jack stopped, his blood running cold. It was probably just a rat. Had to be. Dumpsters were full of rats. But the scratching grew louder, more insistent. And then, impossibly, he heard a voice. You can't throw me away, Jack. His name. It knew his name. Jack spun around, heart pounding. The dumpster lid was closed. Nothing had come out. But the scratching continued, rhythmic and deliberate, like nails dragging across wood. Terror seized him. He ran back to the dumpster, threw open the lid, and dug through the garbage with shaking hands. He found the bag, ripped it open, and there it was, the cross, completely unscathed, as if it had been waiting for him. The moment his fingers touched it, the scratching stopped, and the whisper returned. "I told you. You're mine now." Jack stumbled back into his apartment, the cross clutched in his trembling hand. He slammed the door behind him and leaned against it, gasping for air. His mind was unraveling, logic and reason crumbling under the weight of what he'd just experienced. This wasn't exhaustion. This wasn't his imagination. This was real. The cross was alive, or possessed, or cursed. Whatever it was, it had latched onto him, and it wasn't letting go. He set the cross on the kitchen counter, backing away slowly. He needed help, someone who understood this kind of thing. A priest, maybe. Or his phone rang, shattering the silence. Jack jumped, his heart nearly exploding out of his chest. He grabbed the phone, glancing at the screen. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. But something, curiosity, desperation, or maybe just the need to hear another human voice, made him swipe to accept. "Hello?" Silence. "Hello?" Jack repeated, his voice cracking. And then, through the static, he heard it. A voice. Low, raspy, unmistakable. "You shouldn't have taken the cross, Jack." It was the hitchhiker. Jack's legs nearly gave out. "Who the hell are you? What do you want?" A low, sinister chuckle echoed through the phone. "I already have what I want. You brought me into your life, into your home. And now, Jack, now, I'm never leaving." The line went dead. Jack stared at the phone, his entire body shaking. He looked at the cross on the counter, and for the first time, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. Carved into the base of the cross, in tiny, jagged letters, was a single word: mine. And as Jack stood there, frozen in terror, the lights in his apartment began to flicker. Jack had made a mistake. A terrible, irreversible mistake. And now, whatever dark force he'd invited into his life was just getting started. Jack didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. He sat on his couch, eyes locked on the cross, waiting for it to move, to speak, to do something. But it just sat there on the kitchen counter, silent and still, mocking him. By the time dawn broke, Jack looked like a ghost himself, hollow-eyed, pale, his mind teetering on the edge of sanity. He'd tried everything to get rid of it. He wrapped the cross in towels and shoved it in a drawer, only to find it on his pillow minutes later. He locked it in his closet, only to discover it waiting on the bathroom sink when he went to splash water on his face. The thing was toying with him. At 7 in the morning, his phone buzzed. It was Marcus, but his boss. 3 missed calls already, and now a text demanding to know where the hell he was. Jack was 2 hours late, and Marcus made it clear, get there now or be fired. Jack's stomach dropped. He'd completely forgotten about work. In his state of terror, time had become meaningless. But Marcus's threat was real. One more screw-up, and Jack would lose everything. His job was the only thing keeping him afloat. Without it, he'd lose his apartment, his truck, his entire life. With shaking hands, he grabbed his keys and shoved the cross into his jacket pocket. Leaving it behind was no longer an option. The thing always found its way back to him anyway. The drive to the depot was a blur. Jack's mind was fracturing, splitting between the rational world of bills and deadlines and the nightmare world he'd stumbled into. He kept checking his pocket, feeling the weight of the cross pressing against his chest like a second heart. When he arrived, Marcus was waiting outside, his face purple with rage. He barked at Jack about being 2.5 hours late, asking if he thought this was some kind of charity operation. Jack opened his mouth to explain, but Marcus cut him off, demanding to know if he was on drugs or drinking. He looked like death warmed over. Jack tried to defend himself, but Marcus didn't care. He told Jack he had one delivery today, just one, a straight shot to Memphis. And if Jack screwed this up, if he was even 5 minutes late, he was done, finished, gone. Jack nodded numbly, unable to form words. His entire world was collapsing, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Marcus thrust a clipboard at him, telling him the route was marked and the load was already in the truck. He ordered Jack to get moving. Jack took the clipboard and walked toward his rig on autopilot. Every step felt heavier than the last, like he was walking toward his own execution. He climbed into the cab, and the moment he closed the door, the temperature plummeted. His breath came out in visible puffs. The windows began to fog over. And then he heard it, that voice, slithering through the air like smoke, telling him they were going on a trip together, just the two of them. Jack's hands clenched the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. In a broken whisper, he begged for it to leave him alone. But laughter echoed through the cab, not from any specific direction, but everywhere, surrounding him, suffocating him. The voice told him it couldn't do that. Jack was his now. They were bound, forever. Tears stung Jack's eyes, but he blinked them back. He couldn't break down. Not now. Not when everything was on the line. He started the engine and pulled out of the depot. The weight of the cross in his pocket growing heavier with every mile. The highway stretched out before him like a snake, winding through dense forests and abandoned towns. Jack had driven this route 100 times before, but today it felt different. Wrong. The trees seemed to lean in too close, their branches reaching toward the truck like gnarled fingers. The sky was overcast, casting everything in a sickly gray light, and the cross in his pocket, it was burning not with heat, but with cold. A cold so intense it felt like fire, searing through his jacket, through his shirt, straight into his skin. Jack gritted his teeth against the pain, but it only grew worse. Finally, he pulled the cross out and threw it onto the passenger seat. The moment it left his pocket, the burning stopped. But the relief was short-lived, because the cross began to move. Slowly at first, just a slight shift, like it was being nudged by an invisible hand. Then it started to slide across the seat, inch by inch, until it was sitting upright, leaning against the door. Jack's heart hammered in his chest. He muttered for it to stop, eyes darting between the road and the cross. Just stop. But it didn't stop. The cross began to vibrate, rattling against the door with increasing intensity. The sound filled the cab, a maddening percussion that drilled into Jack's skull. And then, without warning, the radio turned on. Static blared through the speakers, so loud Jack had to cover his ears. He reached for the power button, but before he could turn it off, the static cleared, replaced by that voice, the hitchhiker's voice, telling him he wasn't going to make it. Jack's blood turned to ice. He asked what the voice meant. The voice explained Memphis. Jack wasn't going to make it to Memphis, because it wouldn't let him. Jack shook his head in denial, whispering that it couldn't do that. But the voice hissed back that it could do whatever it wanted. It was in his head now, in his truck, in his life, and it was going to take everything from him. The radio cut out, plunging the cab into silence. Jack's breath came in short, ragged gasps. He pressed harder on the gas, desperate to reach Memphis, to finish this delivery, to salvage what was left of his life. But the road had other plans. A deer appeared out of nowhere, leaping into the middle of the highway. Jack slammed on the brakes, tires screeched. The truck fishtailed wildly. He fought to control it, heart in his throat, adrenaline flooding his system. The truck came to a stop inches from the deer. The animal stood there, staring at Jack through the windshield, its eyes reflecting an unnatural light. And then, it smiled. Jack's mind shattered. The deer didn't smile. They couldn't smile. But this one did, a wide, human grin that stretched impossibly across its face. Then the deer turned and walked off the road, disappearing into the trees. Jack sat there, frozen, his entire body trembling. He was losing his mind. He had to be. None of this was real. None of this could be real. But the cross on the passenger seat said otherwise. He forced himself to start driving again, hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the wheel. The miles crawled by, each one more agonizing than the last. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the road. And that's when Jack noticed the car behind him. It had appeared out of nowhere, headlights cutting through the growing darkness. It was following too close, tailgating him aggressively. Jack sped up. The car matched his speed. He slowed down, hoping it would pass. It slowed down too. Jack's pulse quickened. He glanced in the rearview mirror, trying to see the driver, but the headlights were too bright, blinding him. Then the car pulled up alongside him. Jack looked over, and his heart stopped. The driver was the hitchhiker. He was sitting behind the wheel, grinning that same too-wide grin, eyes locked on Jack. He raised one hand and waved a slow, deliberate gesture that sent chills down Jack's spine. Then the car swerved. It slammed into the side of Jack's truck. Metal shrieked against metal. Jack yanked the wheel, trying to keep control, but the hitchhiker's car hit him again, harder this time. Jack screamed for it to get away from him, his voice raw with terror. The hitchhiker's laughter echoed through the cab, even though the windows were closed, telling Jack he couldn't escape. The thing was everywhere. The car hit him a third time, and Jack's truck veered off the road, crashing through the guardrail. The world tilted as the truck plunged down an embankment. Trees and rocks rushed past in a blur. Jack's head slammed against the steering wheel. Pain exploded through his skull. The truck came to a violent stop at the bottom of the hill, nose buried in the dirt. For a moment, everything was silent. Then Jack heard footsteps crunching through leaves, getting closer. Jack's vision swam as he tried to lift his head. Blood dripped from a gash on his forehead, warm and sticky. His ribs screamed in protest as he tried to move. The driver's side door was ripped open, and there he was, the hitchhiker, standing over him, silhouetted against the darkening sky. He greeted Jack softly, almost tenderly. Jack tried to speak, but only a groan escaped his lips. The hitchhiker crouched down, bringing his face level with Jack's. Up close, he looked even worse than before, skin gray and mottled, eyes sunken so deep they looked like empty sockets. He told Jack that he was probably wondering why this was happening, why he'd been chosen. Jack managed to rasp out a single word, asking why. The hitchhiker's smile widened as he explained. Because Jack was weak, lonely, desperate, the perfect vessel. He reached into the truck and picked up the cross, explaining that it wasn't just a cross. It was a key to a door that should never be opened. And Jack had unlocked it. Jack wheezed that he hadn't done anything, but the hitchhiker whispered that he had. The moment Jack touched the cross, he let the thing in. And now, it was going to use Jack to open more doors, to spread, to grow, until everyone Jack had ever known, everyone he'd ever loved, was just like the hitchhiker. Jack's eyes widened in horror as he whispered his denial. The hitchhiker pressed the cross into Jack's hand, and this time, the cold was unbearable. It spread through his body like poison, freezing his blood, his bones, his very soul. The hitchhiker cooed for Jack not to fight it. It would be over soon, and then Jack would be free. Jack's vision began to fade. The edges of the world grew dark. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the hitchhiker's grin, stretching wider and wider until it consumed everything. When Jack woke up, he was back in his truck. The sun was rising. The cross was gone, and he had no memory of how he got there. But something had changed. Something inside him was different, darker, and as he looked at his hands, he realized, with creeping horror, that they were stained dark marks, like bruises, spreading across his palms. Just like the hitchhiker's had been, the curse had taken root, and Jack's nightmare? It was only beginning. Jack tried to keep driving, tried to pretend everything was normal. But normal had abandoned him the moment he'd picked up that hitchhiker, the moment his fingers had closed around that cursed cross. The haunting had intensified with each passing mile. It wasn't just the cross moving anymore, though it still did that, appearing in different spots throughout the cab like some twisted game of hide and seek. No, it was everything. The entire truck had become infected with whatever darkness clung to that piece of wood. Jack would be driving along, eyes on the road, when suddenly his doors would lock. All of them. Click, 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 click. The sound echoing through the cab like gunshots. Then, just as suddenly, they'd unlock. Click, 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 click. Over and over, a maddening rhythm that set his teeth on edge. The radio was worse. It would turn on by itself, blasting static so loud Jack's ears rang. He'd ripped the fuse out 2 days ago, but it didn't matter. The static still came, pouring from speakers that should have been dead, carrying whispers he couldn't quite make out, but that filled him with bone-deep dread. And the footsteps. God, the footsteps. Every time Jack stopped at a gas station, a rest area, a truck stop, he heard them, following him. The crunch of gravel behind him as he walked to the bathroom. The soft padding of feet on pavement. When he went inside to pay for fuel, he'd spin around, heart hammering, but there was never anyone there. Just empty parking lots and the distant hum of highway traffic. But Jack knew better. He could feel eyes on him, watching, waiting. He looked like hell. He knew it without needing a mirror, though the one in his truck confirmed it every time he made the mistake of glancing at his reflection. His face had gone pale, almost gray. Dark circles hung under his eyes like bruises. His hands shook constantly now, a fine tremor he couldn't control. He'd lost weight, his clothes hung loose on his frame, and he couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten anything more substantial than gas station coffee and stale donuts. The cross sat on his dashboard now, right in his line of sight. He'd stopped trying to hide it, stopped trying to move it. What was the point? It always came back, always found its way to wherever it wanted to be. Sometimes Jack would be driving and catch movement in his peripheral vision. The cross sliding across the dashboard, inch by inch, like an invisible hand was pushing it. Other times he'd look away for just a second, and when he looked back, it would be somewhere completely different. Hanging from the mirror, sitting on the passenger seat, resting on the floor by the pedals. Once, he'd looked down and found it wedged between his legs, pressed up against his thigh. The cold had been so intense he'd nearly driven off the road. Jack was falling apart. He knew it, could feel his sanity fraying at the edges, unraveling thread by thread. But he had to keep going, had to finish his routes. His job was the only thing keeping him tethered to reality, the only proof that he was still a functioning human being and not some hollow shell haunted by forces he couldn't understand. It was at a truck stop outside of Jackson, Mississippi, that another driver finally said something. Jack had just finished fueling up. His hands shook so badly he'd spilled diesel on his boots, and he was standing there, staring at the pump display, trying to remember how to work his credit card. His mind felt like it was wrapped in cotton, thoughts moving slow and sluggish. A voice cut through the fog, someone asking if he was okay. Jack turned to find another trucker standing a few feet away, a big guy, maybe 50, with a weathered face and kind eyes. He introduced himself as Dale, said he'd seen Jack around a few times over the years. They'd probably crossed paths at various stops, the way truckers do. Jack tried to smile, tried to say he was fine, but the words came out wrong, slurred, like he was drunk, though he hadn't touched an alcohol in years. Dale's expression shifted from concern to alarm. He stepped closer, studying Jack's face, and asked again if he was okay. Jack looked like death warmed over. When was the last time he'd slept? Eaten? Jack's defenses crumbled. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was desperation, maybe it was just the simple human need to tell someone, anyone, what was happening to him. Whatever the reason, the story came pouring out. The hitchhiker, the cross, the haunting, all of it spilled from Jack's lips in a frantic rush of words. Dale's face went white. The color drained from his cheeks so fast it was like watching a light switch flip. He took a step back, and for a moment, Jack thought he was going to run. But instead, Dale's voice dropped to barely above a whisper as he asked if Jack still had it. The cross, did he still have it? Jack nodded, gesturing toward his truck. Dale shook his head slowly, his expression grim. He told Jack he'd heard the stories. They all had the truckers who ran routes through Alabama. Stories about hitchhikers on certain stretches of highway. Hitchhikers who gave gifts, cursed objects, crosses, mostly, but sometimes other things. Medallions, coins, photographs. Dale explained that they said once you accept the gift, the spirit follows you home. It invades your space, your sanctuary. For truckers, that meant your rig. The one place that's supposed to be safe, the one place that's truly yours, it becomes theirs. The spirit moves in, makes itself comfortable, and it doesn't leave, not ever. Jack's legs felt weak. He asked what happened to the drivers who took the gifts. Dale's silence was answer enough. But then he spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of old tragedies. Some of them disappeared, just vanished off the face of the earth. Trucks found abandoned on the side of the road, with no sign of the driver. Others crashed single-vehicle accidents on straight, clear roads, like they'd just driven off into nothing. And a few went crazy, completely lost their minds, ended up in institutions, or worse. Jack felt bile rise in his throat. He asked if there was a way to stop it, to get rid of the cross. Dale shook his head. He didn't know. Nobody did. The drivers who survived, and there weren't many, they didn't talk about it. Too traumatized, too afraid that talking about it would bring it back. But Dale had heard one thing. A rumor, really. Something an old-timer had told him years ago. The only way to break free was to confront it, face to face. Return the gift to where it came from. But most people couldn't do it. The fear was too strong, the haunting too intense. By the time they worked up the courage to try, it was too late. The spirit had already claimed them. Jack stood there, swaying slightly, trying to process this information. His mind felt like it was moving through molasses. He asked what Dale meant by claimed. Dale's eyes met his, and Jack saw genuine pity there. The spirit takes over, gets inside your head. Your truck becomes its vessel, and you become its passenger. You're still there, still aware, but you're not driving anymore, not in control. You're just along for the ride, while something else steers your life into darkness. A cold wind swept through the parking lot, though the night was still. Jack shivered, pulling his jacket tighter. He thanked Dale, his voice hollow. Dale put a hand on Jack's shoulder, the gesture both comforting and final. He told Jack to be careful, to be smart, And if Jack couldn't beat this thing, to at least try to keep it away from other people. Don't let it spread. Don't let it claim anyone else. Then Dale walked away, climbing into his truck and pulling out of the lot like he couldn't get away fast enough. Jack stood there alone, the diesel fumes and exhaust mixing with the smell of his own fierce sweat. He looked toward his truck, and through the windshield, he could see the cross sitting on the dashboard. Even from this distance, even in the dim light of the parking lot, it seemed to pulse with a dark energy. That night, Jack made a decision. He couldn't live like this, couldn't spend the rest of his life being haunted, invaded, violated by whatever dark spirit clung to that cursed cross. Dale's words echoed in his mind. Confront it, return it, break free. But first, he had to get rid of the cross. Had to try one more time to throw it away, to sever the connection between himself and the hitchhiker's ghost. Jack drove until he found what he was looking for, a bridge crossing the Pearl River, the water dark and deep below. He pulled over onto the shoulder, put the truck in park, and sat there for a moment, gathering his courage. The cross was on the passenger seat. It had moved there sometime during the drive, though Jack hadn't seen it happen. He reached for it with trembling hands. The moment his fingers touched the wood, cold shot up his arm like an electric shock. But he held on, gripping it, tight, refusing to let go. He climbed out of the truck and walked to the middle of the bridge. The river rushed below, swollen from recent rains. Jack held the cross over the railing, feeling its weight in his hands. It seemed heavier than it should be, like it was fighting him, resisting. He let go. The cross tumbled through the air and hit the water with a splash. Jack watched it sink, the dark wood disappearing beneath the surface. He stood there for a long moment, watching the spot where it had vanished, waiting for it to resurface. It didn't. Relief flooded through him so intensely his knees nearly buckled. It was over. Finally, it was over. The cross was gone, drowned in the river, and with it, the haunting would end. Had to end. Jack walked back to his truck, feeling lighter than he had in days. He climbed into the cab, started the engine, and pulled back onto the highway. For the first time since picking up that hitchhiker, he felt hope. Maybe he'd survive this after all. Maybe he'd get his life back. He drove for about 10 minutes, a genuine smile starting to form on his face, when he decided to reach for his water bottle. His hand brushed against something on the passenger seat, something that shouldn't be there. Jack's heart stopped. He looked down. The cross was sitting on the seat, dry, not a drop of water on it, like it had never touched the river at all. Jack's hands clenched the steering wheel so hard his knuckles went white. A sound escaped his throat, half sob, half scream. He pulled over onto the shoulder, grabbed the cross, and threw it out the window as hard as he could. It sailed into the darkness, disappearing into the trees lining the highway. He drove away, tires squealing. 5 minutes later, he looked in his rearview mirror. The cross was hanging from it. Jack tried again, and again, and again. He threw the cross into a dumpster. It appeared on his dashboard. He left it at a rest stop bathroom. It was waiting on his seat when he returned. He buried it in a field, dirt under his fingernails, sweat pouring down his face. It was sitting on his pillow when he tried to sleep that night. By dawn, Jack sat in his truck, the cross resting on the dashboard in front of him, and the horrifying truth settled over him like a burial shroud. He couldn't get rid of it. The cross had chosen him. It was bound to him now, tied to his life by invisible threads he couldn't cut. And the thing attached to it, the hitchhiker's spirit, or whatever dark entity wore his face, it was getting stronger. Jack could feel it, in the way the temperature in the cab kept dropping, in the way shadows moved in corners where there should be no shadows, in the way he sometimes caught glimpses of a figure in his mirrors, tall, thin, with eyes that reflected no light. The spirit was settling in, making itself at home, and there was nothing Jack could do to stop it. He sat there as the sun rose, illuminating the cross in the morning light. It looked so ordinary, just a simple wooden cross, worn and stained with age. But Jack knew better now. This wasn't just a cursed object. This was a doorway, an invitation, a key that had unlocked something that should have stayed locked forever. And now that it was open, Jack realized with creeping horror, there was no closing it again. The haunting wasn't going to stop. It was only going to get worse. The spirit would continue to grow stronger, continue to invade his space, his truck, his mind, until there was nothing left of Jack at all. Just a hollow vessel driving down endless highways, carrying a passenger that would never leave. Jack started the engine, his movements mechanical, automatic. He had deliveries to make, routes to run, a job to do. Because what else could he do? Where else could he go? The cross would follow him anywhere. The haunting would continue no matter where he ran. So he drove, and the cross sat on his dashboard. And somewhere in the shadows of his truck, Jack felt something watching him, waiting, patient, because it had all the time in the world. And Jack was already trapped. Jack drove through the night in a haze of exhaustion and despair. The cross sat on his dashboard like a malignant tumor, pulsing with that familiar cold energy that had become as constant as his own heartbeat. He'd stopped trying to fight it, stopped trying to throw it away. What was the point? It always came back. But he couldn't keep living like this, couldn't keep driving these endless highways with a ghost-riding shotgun, invading his space, stealing his sanity piece by piece. Dale's words echoed in his mind. Confront it, return it, break free. It was the only option left, the only chance he had. Jack needed answers, needed to understand what he was dealing with before he could face it. And there was only one place to start the stretch of Alabama highway where this nightmare had begun. He drove south, retracing his route from that fateful night. The landscape grew familiar, the same desolate roads, the same sparse trees, the same sense of isolation that had made him stop for the hitchhiker in the first place. As dawn broke over the horizon, Jack spotted a small diner sitting off the highway like a forgotten relic, the kind of place truckers and locals frequented, where gossip flowed as freely as the coffee. Jack pulled into the gravel parking lot, his truck the only vehicle there at this early hour. The diner looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1,970 faded paint, a flickering neon sign that read Rosie's, and windows that needed a good cleaning. But it was open, and right now, that was all that mattered. He left the cross in the truck, let it sit there, and wait for once. Inside, the diner smelled of bacon, grease, and burnt coffee. A handful of locals sat scattered at the counter, and Booth's old men nursing cups of coffee, a waitress with tired eyes, and a kind smile. Jack slid into a booth near the back, and the waitress appeared moments later, with a pot of coffee and a laminated menu. Jack ordered, without looking at the menu, eggs, toast, bacon, food he probably wouldn't be able to eat, but that gave him an excuse to sit here and ask questions. The waitress walked away, and Jack sat there, trying to figure out how to start this conversation. How do you ask people about ghosts and curses without sounding insane? He didn't have to wait long. An old woman at the counter had been watching him since he walked in. She was ancient, had to be in her 80s at least, with white hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that were sharp despite her age. She picked up her coffee cup and shuffled over to Jack's booth, sliding into the seat across from him without asking permission. Her voice was rough, weathered by decades of cigarettes and hard living. She told Jack he looked like a man who'd seen something he shouldn't have, something that wouldn't let him go. Jack's defenses crumbled instantly. Maybe it was because he was so tired. Maybe it was because she seemed to already know. Whatever the reason, he found himself describing the hitchhiker, the tall, gaunt figure with the two intense eyes, the old wooden cross, the stretch of highway where he'd picked the man up. The old woman's face went pale. Her coffee cup rattled as she set it down with shaking hands. She knew the story. Of course she knew it. Everyone around here did, though most folks didn't like to talk about it. Bad luck, they said. Talking about it brought attention, and attention from things like that, nothing good ever came of it. But she told Jack anyway, told him about the drifter who died on that highway back in 1967. Nobody knew his real name, folks just called him the preacher, on account of how he always carried that wooden cross and talked about salvation and damnation. He'd been walking that same stretch of road for months, preaching to anyone who'd listen, warning about the darkness that walked among men. Then one night, he just disappeared. His body was found 3 days later in a ditch off the highway, the cross clutched in his dead hands. The coroner said it was exposure, but folks who saw the body, they said his eyes were wide open, frozen in an expression of pure terror, like he'd seen something that had literally scared him to death. The old woman leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. They buried him in the county cemetery, but the cross? Nobody would touch it. It stayed with his body until someone nobody knew who took it from the grave. After that, the story started. Hitchhikers appearing on that stretch of highway. Always the same figure, always carrying the cross, always looking for someone kind enough, foolish enough, to give him a ride. And once you picked him up, once you accepted his gift, he was in. The preacher's spirit, or whatever dark thing had claimed him in death, it latched onto you, used you, your truck, your home, and life. It all became his. He was trapped between worlds, the old woman explained, unable to move on, unable to rest. So he hitchhiked, rode along with the living, feeding off their fear, their despair, until there was nothing left. Jack's blood ran cold. He asked the question he'd been dreading. Was there a way to stop it? The old woman's expression was grim. Only one way she knew of. You had to confront him, face to face. Return to the exact spot where you picked him up and give the cross back. Refuse his claim on you. But it wasn't easy. The preacher didn't like to let go. He'd fight, bring everything he had, all the fear, all the darkness to break you. Most people couldn't handle it. Most people broke before they even got the chance to try. But if you were strong enough, if you could face him down and reject his claim, the curse would break. The spirit would have to move on, find someone else. You'd be free. Jack sat back, processing this. He asked when he should do it. Was there a specific time? A ritual? The old woman shook her head. Didn't matter when. The preacher was always there, waiting on that stretch of highway, waiting for the ones who'd accepted his gift to come back. Some came willingly, seeking freedom. Others? He pulled them back, drew them to that spot, like moths to a flame. She reached across the table and gripped Jack's hand with surprising strength. Her skin was papery and cold, but her grip was iron. She told him to be strong, to hold on to whatever goodness he had left inside him. The preacher fed on darkness, on fear and guilt and despair. If Jack let those things consume him, he'd lose. But if he could find even a spark of light, of hope, of love, that might be enough. Jack nodded, though he wasn't sure he believed her. He wasn't sure he had any light left inside him. The haunting had hollowed him out, left him empty. But he had to try. What other choice did he have? He thanked the old woman and left money on the table for his untouched breakfast. As he walked toward the door, she called out one last warning. Whatever happened out there, don't look back. Once it's done, once you confront him, you drive away and you don't look back. Not ever. Because if you do, he'll know, and he'll follow you home. Jack stepped out into the morning sunlight, the warmth doing nothing to chase away the cold that had settled in his bones. He climbed into his truck, and there on the dashboard, the cross waited, patient, knowing. Jack started the engine and pointed the truck north, back toward that cursed stretch of Alabama highway, back toward the spot where this nightmare had begun. It was time to end this, one way or another. He knew what he had to do now. He had to face the preacher, had to confront the spirit that had invaded his life, and reclaim what was his. The old woman's words echoed in his mind. Be strong, hold on to the light, don't look back. Jack gripped the steering wheel, his jaw set with determination. He didn't quite feel. The cross seemed to pulse with anticipation, as if it knew what was coming, as if it was eager for the confrontation. The miles passed beneath his wheels, each one bringing him closer to the reckoning that awaited. Jack's heart hammered in his chest, adrenaline and terror mixing into a toxic cocktail that made his hands shake and his vision blur. But he kept driving, kept moving toward that inevitable moment when he would stand face to face with the thing that had been haunting him, and pray that he was strong enough to survive it. The sun had set when Jack reached the spot. He recognized it instantly, the desolate highway stretch, darkness pressing from all sides, the wrongness that made him hesitate that first night. A week ago? 2? It felt like a lifetime. Jack pulled onto the shoulder where he'd picked up the hitchhiker, the preacher. He cut the engine. Oppressive silence flooded the cab, thick, suffocating silence making his ears ring. No crickets, no wind, just his ragged breathing and hammering heart. The cross sat on the dashboard. For the first time since this nightmare began, Jack reached for it willingly. His fingers closed around worn wood, familiar cold shooting through his hand, up his arm, settling in his chest, like ice. But he didn't let go. He gripped it tight and stepped out. The night air was wrong. Too still, too cold for Alabama in late spring. Jack's breath misted as he walked to the front, headlights casting long shadows across the empty highway. He stood in the twin beams, holding the cross, and waited. He didn't wait long. The temperature plummeted. Frost formed on asphalt, spreading from darkness beyond his headlights like reaching fingers. His breath came faster, panic clawing at his throat, but he forced himself to stand firm. Running wouldn't help. Running never helped. A figure emerged from darkness. The preacher looked exactly as Jack remembered, tall, gaunt, dressed in timeless clothes, face pale and, drawn. But his eyes, God, his eyes. Black pits reflecting nothing, absorbing all light, empty, hungry, eternal. He walked forward with deliberate steps. Jack noticed he wasn't alone. Behind him, shapes moved in darkness, shadows writhing, forming almost human silhouettes before dissolving. Whispers filled the air, dozens of voices in unknown languages, words making his skin crawl. The preacher stopped 10 feet away, just at the headlight beam's edge. When he spoke, his voice was exactly as Jack remembered too many voices layered together, creating sound that shouldn't come from human throat. "You invited me in." The words hung like an accusation. Jack's hands trembled, but he held the cross out like a shield. His voice cracked but came out clear. "I'm giving it back. I don't want it. I don't want you. Leave me alone." The preacher's lips pulled back in something resembling a smile, revealing teeth too white, too perfect. "You gave me a passage. You accepted my gift. Your truck, your life, they're mine now. You belong to the road, to me." The shadows surged forward. Jack could see them clearly now. Faces, dozens of faces twisted in agony. Other drivers, other victims. Souls the preacher had claimed over decades, trapped in his wake, forced to follow through eternity. Jack's resolve wavered. He stepped back, legs hitting the bumper. The preacher moved forward, closing distance, and Jack felt it, the pull. Invisible hands, grabbing, trying to drag him into darkness, into that mass of tortured souls. His strength was draining. He could feel his will breaking, mind fracturing under the weight of the preacher's presence. The cross burned in his hands, not with cold now, but searing heat blistering his palms. He wanted to drop it, to run, to surrender just so the pain would stop. But then he remembered the old woman's words. "Hold on to whatever goodness you have left. Find the light." Jack thought of his mother, dead 15 years, but her memory sharp. Her smile when he came home, her prayers for his safety, the small Bible she'd given him, tucked in his pocket now, a talisman against darkness. He thought of Dale, the trucker who'd warned him, who cared enough to share stories and offer help. He thought of every act of kindness on the road, drivers helping each other, strangers becoming friends, the brotherhood that sustained him through lonely nights. He thought of why he'd stopped for the hitchhiker, because he was kind, because he wanted to help, because despite everything dark in the world, he'd chosen to be light. That was his strength. Not physical power, not courage, just simple human kindness. And that was something the preacher could never take. Jack straightened, meeting those black pit eyes. His voice was steady now, filled with certainty he hadn't known he possessed. "No, you're wrong. My truck is mine, my life is mine, and I'm not giving them to you." He threw the cross at the preacher's feet. "I reject your gift. I reject your claim. You have no power over me." The preacher's face contorted with rage. The shadows exploded forward, a wave of darkness and screaming faces rushing toward Jack. He felt them hit like a physical blow, cold, hateful, desperate. They clawed at him, trying to pull him under, trying to drag him into eternal torment. But Jack held firm. He pulled out his mother's Bible, small, worn, pages yellowed with age, and began to read. His voice was shaky at first, but grew stronger with each word. Psalm 23. "The Lord is my shepherd." Light erupted from the pages, pure white light cutting through darkness like a blade. The shadows shrieked, recoiling, dissolving in radiance. The preacher screamed, a sound tearing through the night, filled with rage and pain and something resembling fear. Jack kept reading. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." The cross at the preacher's feet burst into flames. Not normal fire, holy fire. White flames consuming the wood, turning it to ash in seconds. The preacher reached for it, but flames spread to his hands, arms, entire body. He burned. The shadows burned with him. The tortured souls burned too. But their screams weren't of pain, they were of relief, of release. As flames consumed them, their expressions changed from agony to peace, and one by one, they faded into light and were gone. The preacher was last. He stood engulfed in white fire, black eyes locked on Jack's. For just a moment, Jack saw something human. Gratitude, maybe, or exhaustion, the weariness of a soul trapped too long. Then he was gone. The flames died. The darkness lifted. Just like that, it was over. Jack stood alone, his mother's Bible clutched in trembling hands. The cross was nothing but ash, already scattering in the wind that had suddenly picked up. The oppressive silence broke with normal night sounds: crickets, chirping, a distant owl hooting, rustling leaves. It was over. The preacher was gone. The curse was broken. Jack climbed into his truck on shaking legs. He started the engine. It turned over smoothly. No hesitation, no supernatural interference. Just his truck, his sanctuary, his home. Finally his again. He put it in gear and pulled back onto the highway, driving away from that cursed spot. And he didn't look back, not once, because the old woman had been right. Some things, once you're free of them, you don't ever look back at. You just keep driving forward, grateful for the light, and leave the darkness behind where it belongs.